Hi there, it's Tim Liu from Foolproof here. Today's guest on UX Strategy, Thinking and Doing, our video series on experience design and experience design strategy, is Jim Kalbach. Jim Kalbach is currently the head of customer success at Mural, a cloud-based collaboration tool that we're huge fans of here at Foolproof and we're using with a number of global clients. He's had design leadership roles at organisations as diverse as eBay, Audi and Sony. And actually, significantly, he's the author of a couple of my go-to references in terms of UX and design strategy. And last year published Mapping Experiences on O'Reilly in 2016. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome Jim Kalbach.
Hey Tim, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to see it. Hopefully I'll get to see you later in the year in Boulder.
Oh, you're going? Yeah, I should be there, yeah.
Oh, that'll be excellent. Yeah. So Jim, this series is about experience design and experience design strategy, and it's called Thinking and Doing. So we're interested in how leaders in, sort of global leaders in the practice of experience design strategy, how their thinking's evolved over the last few years. And actually we're interested in actually, in the field, what are some key lessons that they've picked up around actually doing the strategy process and delivering strategy and implementing strategy in organisations. So the first question that I've been asking all our guests is, so if you had to describe experience design strategy or UX strategy to someone, how would you do that?
Yeah, sure. It's a tough question, and defining the damn thing is always a can of worms, right? And people have different definitions. I think part of that has to do with the squishiness of the terms themselves, strategy and UX. I mean, you can ask, what is strategy, what is UX, and you put those two together, you don't necessarily get more clarity. But for me, I think UX strategy is a component that rolls up. If you think about strategy as kind of cascading down, it's a component that rolls up and supports a larger superordinate strategy. But it's really about looking at the UX. I think it has two kind of components to it. One is looking at the UX capability, so looking at the team, the processes, the capabilities, and how that then delivers a user experience, all in a way that is congruent with what the business or the business unit is trying to do, as well as other superordinate strategies, like there might be a brand strategy or product strategy that you're trying to support. So in that sense, I mean, I think UX strategy is a supporting strategy that rolls up.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting. I think when we were first at the UX Strat conference in Atlanta many years ago, most of the frameworks were really about what should we do? But actually, in the last 6 months, Foolproof's received a number of UX strategy briefs which were mainly about capability, organisation, process. It was related to maturity and culture, really, about the organisation. And so I guess one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the series, Jim, is I think more than any other person I've spoken to or sort of I know in the sort of space around experience design strategy has been you've reached into business strategy thinking and really thought about how does that apply in design. And so that's been really kind of a powerful thing for me. And I've seen you speak on a couple of things like jobs to be done, sort of the Clayton Christensen jobs to be done methodology and how that applies to design. And same with this idea that Michael Porter's sort of latest thing about shared value. I guess what made you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the point that I just made that, strategy cascades down in an organization. There's a corporate strategy, business unit strategy, product strategy. You can even go down to the, your own personal strategy, right? So if we view strategy as a cascading kind of dynamic phenomena inside of an organization that moves from one level to the next level, that all has to be aligned. And I think more and more what we're seeing is kind of a tectonic shift in business strategy that is focused more and more on the customer and the user. So that is now core to the strategy, which I think is an opportunity for design and UX, that we're now not just contributing to delivering a product interface, but looking at the customer in a holistic way is core to the strategy, to the company strategy, which it should be, actually. And to some degree, I feel that UX and a lot of motions around things like design thinking in organizations are actually filling in a gap that probably shouldn't have been there anyway. That why aren't businesses for the past couple of decades, why haven't they had customer centricity at the core of their strategy? So I see UX strategy as a subordinate strategy to company strategy, but we're moving up, and the two may merge so that the notion of UX strategy just kind of goes away because it's already contained in the company strategy.
Absolutely. I mean, and certainly my thinking has really evolved from my starting point for strategy is very top down. So what's the purpose of this company? What's their mission and vision? And so then how does that have to manifest itself to a customer, and actually where is that going to? Do they want to access different customers and different audiences and segments in the future? Is their offering proposition, does that actually, to stay relevant, does it have to change or become something different even though they're doing the same thing? And this is what Jobs to be Done is really interesting to me, because Jobs to be Done is, I think the example that when I first read about it was, if Canon thought what they were doing as a company, were they certainly Kodak's the example, but I think Canon have been quite good in terms of taking this kind of two types of photography, really. One which is sort of instant, spontaneous, and which is the kind of the phone is sort of become synonymous with that. But actually, there's still a type of photography which is about artistry and a level of quality, where the quality and actually what it needs to be still needs to sit in something like a DSLR. I guess how did you discover Jobs to be Done, and actually how did you start fitting that into design?
Yeah, I came across the topic, 10 or 15 years ago, in particular through the writings of Clayton Christensen and then Tony Ulwick as well too, kind of a Harvard Business Review crowd. Clayton Christensen, of course, at Harvard Business School, but it was in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, and then the follow-up book to that, The Innovator's Solution. In particular, chapter 4 of that second book focuses a lot on jobs to be done, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, because the cause that I had been fighting for was human-centered design, customer centricity, looking at human needs, and here we have one of the most respected business leaders, thought leaders in the world, talking about human needs being at the core of a business model, being at the core of a company strategy with his notion of disruption. And I mean, for me, right away, it was like a light bulb went on, and I said, hey, wow, this is what we're doing. Why aren't we contributing to these conversations? Yeah. At a minimum, contributing to the conversations. And it seemed like there was a lot of similar ground in the way that business thought leaders, like Tony Ulwick and Clayton Christensen and others, were talking about jobs to be done, and what I had already been doing for 10 years in my career as a UX designer. So I just saw opportunity, and trying to point, at a minimum, get people in our field aware of this language and these principles that business people are talking about, and how we can potentially directly contribute to that. And since then, I've latched on to the concept of jobs to be done, and trying to claim it as a UX tool as well too, so that we close that gap. And like I said, at the beginning, that the notion of customer centricity, and start with the human goal for your business, not just for creating a design of a product, but your business starts with a human goal, and articulating that and understanding that and researching that and things like that. Those are the things that we do well, so therefore we should be able to contribute more directly to the business strategy, and that's really kind of my attraction to Jobs to Be Done, is that's really cool. At the heart of one of the most important business theories, disruption and disruptive technologies, is the notion of human needs, and who's better poised to understand that than us?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. I've had a few moments like that where I've sort of read a business text and thought, that's a straight use, almost a direct use of actually a methodology that we would describe. I think there are other business thinkers and writers and speakers like Roger Martin, and certainly Porter recently, that I sort of... I mean, who, just for the sake of our sort of viewers and listeners, are there sort of business techs and thinkers that you would suggest people seek out?
Right. Well, I mean, the Clayton Christensen and Tony Ulwick, I think, particularly for the topic of Jobs to Be Done. For me, Roger Martin, it had just really kind of clarified my thinking on strategy. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, but I have a better understanding of what I want strategy to be in general, in the abstract sense, from Roger Martin, in particularly his book, 2014, I guess, Playing to Win, lays out a really good framework there. But other folks, like Henry Mintzberg, wrote a book called Strategy Safari, which is kind of dense and almost confusing. But he has a lot of other writings as well, too, that I think are accessible and influential. Just a side note on Henry Mintzberg, he wrote an article in 1986, I believe, where he actually brings up the notion of emergent strategy. So we have this, I think sometimes strategy is put up, it's kind of a paper tiger almost, where people say, well, you can't predict the future, therefore you can't have strategy. But he, no one person can stand up and say, this is the direction the company is going, and I'm 100% certain of that for the next year or however long your strategic horizons are. But he says way back in 1986 that strategy is both, about intent and a specific intent, but it's also emergent. That you can have intent, but change courses as well at the same time. That those two things, emergent strategy and a defined strategy, aren't dichotomies. It's not one or the other. And a lot of people talking about emergent strategy these days, particularly from the lean kind of side of things, as if that's the alternative to a defined strategy, but he, in 1986, he was saying that no, that's actually the two sides of the same coin. That you have to have a defined strategy, but you also have to let it emerge as well too. So people like Henry Mintzberg, I think, I would recommend folks read as well too. Last one, Robert Rummelt wrote a really good book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. Yeah. And he at a very abstract level, he defines what strategy is, and some really good thinking there on that one.
Oh, that's really helpful. Actually, I'd love to talk about this this idea of, is design the thing that creates a kind of circle which is defined strategy and emergent strategy? I guess, could you talk to that a bit?
I don't think it's necessarily design. I think it's a design thinking mindset. And I think that's, by the way, another contribution that design brings to the business strategy table is the fact that strategy is creative and strategy is emergent, and you need to have an experimental mindset, an open mindset as well too. Yes, we defined our strategy, but as signals come back in from the market, whatever that might be, at the highest level or at a lower level like a UX strategy level. As those signals come back, you may have to react and change. That doesn't mean you need to change your direction completely. That, with the notion of an umbrella strategy, you still might have kind of direction set, but within that direction, you allow yourself to react as well too. So direction and reaction are both possible at the same time. And I think designers bring that mindset naturally to the table as well too. And I do agree with those people who say that a business leader can't stand up in front of the company and definitively say where they're going to be in 5 years or even 3 years or even 1 year. That if somebody says this is where we're going and we're not going to change our course, and I know that's the answer, don't believe them. Kind of that kind of thing. And I think that's a designerly mindset that we bring to the table as well too. So it's not just our skills, understanding human needs and things like that. It's also the mindset that we bring. And I think that's the cover of the Harvard Business Review at the end of 2015 there had a thing on design thinking. And I think the point of that was about the mindset that businesses need to have these days is a designer mindset.
Absolutely. I mean, one of my clients at the moment is really sort of maybe slightly late to the party, but has drunk the design thinking Kool-Aid. And it's incredible to see how they talk about it now in terms of trying to elevate it as a kind of a mindset and a way of thinking as opposed to a process. It's very encouraging. Right. Very encouraging.
That's great.
The other sort of area that certainly where my thinking has moved on to is the idea that where strategy used to be held in PowerPoint decks and conceptual models is actually that, and this is a bit of a bad pun, but the idea that you could help an organisation experience strategy. So strategy is not something that you read and try and intellectually understand, but that you could immerse yourself and experience as a customer. This is what the future is supposed to look like. Right. And this is where designers and people who make things should be really uniquely positioned, where the world's becoming a lot more unpredictable. If we say this is our intent, but actually it's really the experiments around whether that's right or not are going to tell us whether that's right. I sort of link to this emergent strategy thinking. Is actually we have to make things. We have to make things for people to actually understand what the strategy is. I mean, does that kind of chime with you in any way?
Totally. And I think that's where strategy gets a bad name. That a few guys, and it usually is guys, men in a company, go on a strategic offsite, which is kind of a joke, and they decide the direction of the company for the next year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, and then they come back to the company, and in a PowerPoint deck with bullet points, they say, "Here's our strategy. Now go execute," and then you never see that PowerPoint again. They don't talk about it. You don't know if anybody has buy-in, and then 6 months later, everybody's wondering why the implementation of that strategy is off track. So I think strategy, this notion of like a closed box kind of strategy, is broken. So I don't think strategy is broken. I think the practice of strategy is broken because strategy needs to be inclusive. Strategy needs to be creative. And that's why you see frameworks like the business model canvas and a lot of the work that the company Explain, I don't know if you know Dave Gray's Explain company, about activating strategy, getting buy-in around strategy, things like that. And even to some degree the little strategy blueprint canvas that I created was, I think, a step in that direction to say, well, strategy is what we all do as a team, as a company. Strategy is creative. Strategy needs buy-in from everybody, right? So kind of opening up this closed-door nature of strategy, I think, is a huge part of strategy moving forward. That is something we all create. It's something that we all own. So co-creation of strategy, I think, is important moving forward, and we're seeing more and more of that, right? That where that kind of those kinds of activities are opening up strategy. The other component, by the way, that I think is missing currently from corporate strategy, that PowerPoint with bullet points, in it, is just the notion of aspiration and vision and engagement there. I think a strategy should speak to the purpose of a company. It should have heart and soul, like you were saying, before. And I think sometimes strategy is, we're going to make the $1 billion mark by expanding our markets through direct sales. That's not going to keep me up on working on the weekends. Like how am I changing the world? How am I impacting people's lives, or doing something that is more aspirational than just making more money for people on Wall Street? Kind of thing. So I think that the notion of injecting aspiration back into strategy and making it lively is important too.
That's in fact, sort of on that sort of point. There was a presentation I saw you give last year which was about this concept of shared value. Could you share a little bit about what that is, and I guess how you came across it?
Sure. Michael Porter, by the way, another person that people should read. He has a landmark article called "What is Strategy?" Pretty good SEO on that, because if you type in "what is strategy" in Google, you probably get that. There's a PDF of that floating around. If you get to the Harvard Business Review site, you might be blocked, but there are copies of that around. It's kind of dense, and if you have insomnia, like, you might want to read that one because it'll put you to sleep. But I recommend that "What is Strategy." He's also written the books on huge, thick books on things like competitive advantage and things like that. So to some degree, he was the cause. Decades ago, he was the cause of this closed off strategy creation kind of mentality of companies, that only the people with the knowledge of things like competitive advantage could create strategy, and then you get the PowerPoint with the bullet points back. But he recently realized, observing through observations and studies that they do there. I think he's at Harvard too. That the way that businesses are going to be profitable in the future has fundamentally changed, and that corporations are now blamed for a lot of society's woes and ills: unemployment, environmental problems, sustainability, things like that. And he's saying what we're seeing these days is a reversal of that. That companies that are succeeding are taking those societal problems and making them the core of their business model that they're addressing, which is different than donations or corporate social responsibility. It's not about having a team that gives money. It's about saying that every time a customer transacts with us, it's going to have a net positive good with a capital G that goes back into society as well too. So green programs, for instance, from hotel chain that might have a green program, things like that. Skype in the classroom. There's a lot of micro loans in developing countries and things like that. From a quote unquote classic business standpoint, those things don't make good business sense, using the classic traditional models of what good business is. But moving forward, that's going to be more and more important. And at the core of that is looking at things like human needs and what are society's ills, or Michael, I have this great quote from him in a video where he says, well, if you're in the financial business, let's look at what financing means to people and start our business model there. So again, kind of like Jobs to Be Done in a slightly different context, it's about businesses having this kind of almost a flip in their thinking to how to be successful, and saying we got to start with the customer and work back towards our business.
I mean, in some way, I remember when I read it, I thought, wow, in a way it's an extension of thinking, well, the user of a company could be an individual customer, but it could be a community. The environment could be a user of the company. It's a really... it doesn't actually take that much to shift that onto that way of thinking about actually how we apply our method and process and thinking, really.
Yeah, and one of the users or customers of a company is also its employees. And part of this shared value trend that we're seeing is people are choosing, particularly millennials, they're choosing jobs based on how well they believe the company that they're working for is doing good, back to society. So if you're a young UX designer, going to work for a Monsanto might not be the first choice. Instead, you're going to work maybe for less money at a company like here in the United States, 18F, which is a governmental design agency trying to help our government be more efficient and customer centric and things like that. And you see people making those choices as an employer. I think the one of the drivers behind the notion of shared value as being the new strategic impetus moving forward is just the amount of information that people have and the transparency of information that people have these days. So if you're going to apply for a job, you can research that company. You can research where they get their goods are sourced from and things like that. What their CEO believes and who she donated to and things like that. And so as an employer, employee rather, or as a customer, a consumer of their goods, this idea of transparency is now actually driving people's choices. You want the fair trade coffee. right? And people are choosing fair trade coffee over, even though it costs more, they're choosing that over, not fair trade coffee. Or, where do I want to work? I want to work for a company that is doing, good socially rather than one that is not, or polluting the environment or something like that, even if I'm making less money. So the choice is, prices will always be there and money will always be a factor, but there's this additional layer of decision making on top of it, which is a human aspect. It's a human dynamic to understand what motivates human beings, how do human beings make decisions, what are the needs that people have. And again, that's right in our court. The ball's right back in our court. So I kind of see these lines of business thinking, jobs to be done, disruptive innovation, shared value, kind of taking off without us. So I kind of lament that to some degree, and I think we need to reposition ourselves, but I also think we need to kind of insert ourselves into those conversations.
I totally agree. The slight worry I've always had about UX in our community, we're highly engaged, very good self-improvers, talk to each other a lot, and how much we engage outside of our very specific community into how much are we talking to people in business or specifically in technology. I lament that as well. I do slightly worry that actually I kind of see this moment where management consultancies might just go, we'll have that. Thanks very much for that one. We'll take that.
Exactly, yeah.
So the one thing you mentioned there, and actually this is something that I'm seeing, is there's sort of been waves of where experience design and UX have really sort of been hot, and I think B2C was that kind of first wave. I'm a B2B guy, and I'm sort of living in this sort of time where B2B now there's a lot of investment. But this sort of business to employer, is that something that you've sort of seen sort of become more important?
Say it again. The business as employer.
Business to employee. Sorry. So the improving the experience of staff.
Yeah, absolutely. For lots of different reasons. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was also kind of the consumerization of IT. This notion that the user experience of B2B applications doesn't matter. They signed the $1 million deal, and none of the users can change the product anyway. It doesn't matter. The buyer and the user are completely separate entities, and you kind of had these B2B ugliness that we've kind of put up with. But you're starting. The problem is, I mean, if you just look down on your iPhone or your Android phone, that B2B app is going to be right next door to a consumer, right next to a consumer app. So this is the human centricity that I think we bring to the table, is that now even though you're not in the same market, you're not competing with that consumer app because you're B2B. You're not even in the same industry or the same field. But in terms of the experience, you are competing with those consumer apps as well too. So I think the notion of B2B changes in that respect, which then I think the effect is that the buying decision is now based on, what experience am I giving to my employees? Right, not just what deal can I get from this B2B provider as the buyer of B2B services, but rather what's going to be the net effect of that. And then there are lots of things around efficiency. I mean, that's the typical ROI of B2B is saving time, travel, saving travel costs and things like that. But I think what we're starting to see is another layer is this a tool that people are going to spend time in on a day-to-day basis? And if their choice is I have a consumer app or a B2B app, right? That the experience is part of that decision-making process now at the B2B level, because people want their employees to have a good experience as well too.
Yeah, I'm working with an organisation at the moment where they've been quite smart. We were having a discussion about, so how are you going to business case improving this employee experience, digital workplace experience? Yeah. And they said, look, we could create spreadsheets to try and prove to ourselves that this is going to be more efficient. But it might be just easy to say this is the right thing to do. We're not going to attract and retain the next generation of staff if this is no good. And That's a bit of a breakthrough, I think.
Yeah, and I think, for me too, particularly in my role at Mural, we're part of that digital workspace, and we contribute to that. And what I would love to see in the near future, as soon as possible, is an attention paid to what I call the digitally defined workspace. Remote work is on the rise. Everything that we do is digitized anyway. So we actually spend more time in our digital workspaces, computer, Skype, Box, project management tools, things like that. Skype, using those tools than we do interacting with our colleagues face to face. Yet at the same time, businesses are creating these elaborate office spaces with beanbag chairs and free lunch and all that kind of stuff to attract employees. And you better believe that if you have one of those, new cool office spaces, that's a recruiting tool. Right? That they bring those candidates in and say, look, here's what you get. You get a basketball court and free lunch and all that kind of stuff. I would love that same kind of effect to come from the digitally defined workspace, that you're attracting people, employees, because you say, look at this cool set of tools that you get. We have the most modern tools as well, too. Because right now, the collection of digital tools that we use as employees within our companies is just kind of haphazard. It's like whatever comes together. And, I've worked at companies where we had like 5 different chat programs. And depending on who I was talking to, I would use a different chat program. And then you can't find anything because you're using an intranet and Dropbox and all these other things, and there's nobody looking after that side of things. So this digital workplace is really just kind of haphazard and almost the Wild West right now, where at the same time we're spending, companies are spending millions of dollars on these cool office spaces. I would like to almost see that inverted and say, hey, we got this cool digital workspace. And that plays into your B2B argument that I was talking about as well, too, that buying software, not just because it's efficient and you can calculate the ROI, like you're saying, but it's going to be attractive and cool and a great experience for the employees that will actually draw people in because they want to work with those tools, right?
Oh, well, I'm certainly in collaborating with some of our clients, we've actually had that moment with them using Mural, so I totally recommend that. Okay. As an experienced design strategist, I guess what excites you most about the future, Jim?
I think it is this potential intersection of what used to be classic, business thinking in terms of strategy and an explicit attention being paid to customers and users, and where those two overlap. So jobs to be done, shared value, I think for me are kind of two shining examples of what is actually happening. These aren't things in the future or theoretical. This is what's going on in business these days. And to some degree, I kind of feel like we're missing out on that. And I think to some degree it's our own fault. I think UX, the label UX, has gotten smaller. At least when I got into the field 20 years ago, UX meant everything. And somewhere along the line, then CX came along and said, no, we're taking over this part of it. And service design was always kind of there, but that kind of took over it. And UX is now becoming UX/UI. In fact, you see job descriptions, UX/UI. And UX is starting to mean...
There's nothing more depressing than seeing that ad like that way.
What's that?
There's nothing more depressing than seeing that ad.
Right, because what it does is it reduces UX to the design of digital product interfaces. That's it. Whereas, like I was saying, 20 years ago, for me, UX was everything. So I think the term UX actually holds us back. I think our own skill sets hold us back as well too. And I don't want to say I've cracked that nut, but we've been banging our fist on the table that we need a seat at that table. And I think there are some opportunities, but I'm not sure if we're developed enough as a field in general to actually deliver on what you need to have a seat at that table as well too. I think we can do it. And in other design disciplines like industrial design, they are a little more advanced than UX in that respect as well too, showing business value, showing how they contribute to the bottom line and things like that. But I think it's that intersection of where UX design and business come, and I think looking at experience as its own kind of component of strategy is important. Not UX/UI experience, but the human experience. looking at that. So I think that's where I think the future is moving towards, this notion of experience design in and of itself. And the qualification, customer experience, user experience doesn't matter. It's human experience and what value that brings to a business and how those things intersect. That's where I see things going. And I hope we continue to be more and more part of the conversation.
Me too. Jim, that's all we've got time for today, but thanks so much for your time and thoughts. It was a really, really enjoyable chat, and hopefully we'll get to speak in the future.
Well, I'm sure we will, Tim. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I look forward to seeing you in Boulder, and I hope that was some good thoughts or content ideas for your listeners.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, everybody.